Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us on The World Today. Today's world no longer moves through isolated headlines. Every explosion in the skies over Russia, every drone striking critical infrastructure, every military convoy in Ukraine, and every statement from Washington, Moscow, Brussels, or Warsaw is becoming part of a much larger picture. It is the picture of a world entering a new period of instability, a world where war is no longer confined to trenches and front lines, but is spreading into airports, oil refineries, military bases, diplomatic corridors, national economies, and even the daily lives of ordinary people. And one major question now stands before us. Is Europe preparing for peace? Or is it quietly preparing for a long-term confrontation? In today's program, The World Today will take you deep into the most important developments: Ukraine's alleged drone strike on an air traffic coordination center in southern Russia, which disrupted operations at several airports, the war in Ukraine turning the country into a weapons innovation hub for Europe, civilian pickup trucks becoming strategic battlefield assets, Ukraine's increasingly complex defensive lines, the United States considering a partial troop withdrawal from Germany, NATO facing new pressure, Poland training civilians for crisis scenarios, and the European Union continuing to struggle with migration, border security, and internal unity. Ladies and gentlemen, the first story drawing major attention across southern Russia is the reported Ukrainian drone strike on an administrative building belonging to an air navigation unit in Rostov. In purely military terms, this may not have been a massive attack in the traditional sense, but in terms of impact, it was highly significant. When an air traffic coordination facility is affected, the entire operating system behind it is immediately disrupted. Airports must adjust flight schedules. Airlines must change their plans. Passengers are forced to wait. Transport authorities must look for alternative options, including trains and buses. In just a short period of time, a drone strike can turn into a civilian infrastructure crisis. According to the original script, operations at 13 airports in southern Russia were affected. Dozens of flights were delayed or cancelled. Sochi Airport alone recorded serious disruption, while an estimated 14,000 passengers were left stranded in terminals, waiting for updated travel information. This, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the most alarming features of modern warfare. An attack does not need to completely destroy a military target in order to create major consequences. It only needs to hit a critical link in the system. Once that happens, disruption spreads, psychological pressure increases, infrastructure protection becomes more expensive, and defense systems are forced to stretch across a wider area. For Ukraine, deep strikes into Russian territory carry several meanings. They show that Russia's rear areas are no longer completely safe. They force Moscow to disperse its air defense resources. They send a message that even under pressure on the front line, Ukraine still has the ability to hit targets far from the battlefield. For Russia, every such attack is a warning that the war is no longer limited to Donbas, Zaporizhia, or Kharkiv. It can now touch airports, oil refineries, fuel depots, and coordination centers deep inside Russian territory. Around the same period, Russia accused Ukraine of expanding drone attacks into several other regions. Some industrial facilities and oil refineries mentioned in the original script reportedly caught fire after these strikes. Looking at the broader trend, we can see very clearly that the Russia-Ukraine war is shifting from a frontline confrontation into a wider battle over infrastructure, logistics, energy, and public psychology. An attacked oil refinery is not just an industrial loss. It can affect fuel supply chains. A disrupted airport is not just a delay for a few flights. It makes ordinary citizens feel that the war has moved closer to their everyday lives. A damaged coordination center is not only a physical loss. It reveals the vulnerability of the systems that modern societies depend on every single day. And from here, we move to a much bigger question: why is Ukraine, once considered militarily weaker than Russia, now becoming a weapons innovation hub that many European countries are watching closely? Throughout the war, Ukraine has repeatedly asked its Western partners for more weapons, tanks, long-range missiles, fighter jets, air defense systems, artillery, and ammunition. But Western support, although enormous in value, has not always arrived at the right time, in the right quantity, or in the exact form Ukraine wanted. Some decisions were delayed because of political debates. Some weapons were supplied in limited numbers. Some were delivered with strict conditions on how they could be used. And at certain moments, aid slowed down because of political changes inside Western countries. That shortage placed Ukraine in a harsh position: either wait or innovate in order to survive. Ukraine chose the second path. When artillery firepower was limited, Ukraine expanded its use of drones. When long-range missiles were insufficient, it developed long-range drone strike capabilities. When expensive air defense systems were not enough to intercept every incoming threat, Ukraine began developing lower-cost interceptor drones. When armored vehicles were being lost faster than they could be replaced, Ukraine converted civilian pickup trucks into transport, medical evacuation, reconnaissance, and even mobile combat vehicles. This is not innovation in a peaceful laboratory. This is innovation under the pressure of survival. And that is exactly why it has such strong practical value. Ukraine is teaching Europe an important lesson: in the wars of the future, the most expensive weapon will not always be the deciding factor. What may matter more is the ability to produce quickly, repair quickly, adapt quickly, learn quickly, and deploy quickly. First-person view drones, often known as FPV drones, have become one of the defining symbols of this war. These relatively low-cost devices can cause serious damage to tanks, armored vehicles, artillery systems, shelters, and infantry formations. A small drone, if guided accurately, can change the outcome of a tactical battle. But what matters even more is the speed of adaptation. Every time Russia finds a way to jam Ukrainian drones, Ukraine changes frequencies, modifies software, and adjusts tactics. Every time one system becomes less effective, engineers, soldiers, and volunteers search for improvements. The battlefield becomes a testing ground. Soldiers become direct product reviewers. Weapons producers are forced to learn from real combat every single day. Ladies and gentlemen, if war was once imagined as a contest between tanks, artillery, and mechanized infantry, the war in Ukraine now reveals a new reality. Modern war is a contest between sensors, data, drones, electronic warfare, production capacity, and decision-making speed. The side that sees first has a chance to strike first. The side that jams better can blind the enemy. The side that produces faster can replace losses faster. The side that learns faster survives longer. That is why many European countries are not only sending aid to Ukraine, they are also learning from Ukraine. They no longer see Ukraine merely as a country in need of support. They also see it as a source of modern warfare experience, where old assumptions about combat, defense, and defense industry are being tested through blood, steel, and every meter of trench line. One of the clearest examples of this adaptation is Ukraine's use of civilian pickup trucks on the battlefield. At first glance, pickup trucks may seem like ordinary vehicles, but in a war of attrition, that ordinariness becomes an advantage. Tanks are powerful, but they are expensive, heavy, easier to detect, and difficult to replace once destroyed. Armored vehicles offer better protection, but they also require complicated maintenance and limited supply chains. Pickup trucks, by contrast, are cheaper, easier to repair, easier to find spare parts for, more mobile, and adaptable to many different missions. A pickup truck can transport troops to the front line. It can carry ammunition. It can evacuate wounded soldiers. It can be fitted with a machine gun. It can carry anti-drone jamming equipment. It can support mobile air defense teams. It can move a rapid reaction unit into position and withdraw before the enemy can lock onto it. On a battlefield filled with drones, survival does not always depend on thick armor. Sometimes it depends on moving fast, dispersing into smaller units, hiding well, and not staying in one position for too long. That is why pickup trucks have become part of Ukraine's adaptation strategy. They do not completely replace tanks. They are not more powerful than artillery, but they fit a type of warfare in which speed, low cost, and quick replacement have become matters of survival. The story of Ukraine's pickup trucks tells us something very important. In modern war, a country does not always need to have the best of everything. It must know how to turn what it has into something useful. That is the logic of survival. And sometimes, the logic of survival creates changes more powerful than military plans written years in advance. Alongside its attack and mobility capabilities, Ukraine is also building an increasingly complex defensive system. In the early phase of the war, defensive lines, trenches, and obstacles played an important role in slowing Russia's advance. But as the war dragged on, Ukraine moved beyond simple trench systems. It has built a layered defensive network with depth, anti-tank ditches, minefields, concrete barriers, barbed wire, dispersed fortifications, shelters, covered trenches, anti-drone camouflage systems, and protected corridors for supply routes. The key point is that Ukrainian defense is no longer passive. It is not simply designed to hold ground. It is designed to slow the enemy, split enemy formations, force them into pre-planned kill zones, and then make them targets for artillery, FPV drones, and counterattack teams. In other words, a defensive line is no longer just a wall. It is a trap. When Russian forces advance, they may first encounter anti-tank ditches. If they pass those, they may hit minefields. If they get through the minefields, they may be slowed by barbed wire and concrete obstacles. Once their formation slows down, Ukrainian drones appear. When vehicles get stuck, artillery opens fire. When communications are jammed, coordination becomes harder, and when formations are broken into smaller groups, defenders gain opportunities to counterattack. This is very different from the old image of a simple trench line. In modern warfare, effective defense is not just about digging deeper. It is about combining fortifications, sensors, drones, electronic warfare, precision firepower, and the mobility of small units. A strong defensive line does not always have to be an unbreakable wall. It can be a flexible network that forces the enemy to pay an extremely high price for every step forward. This is why the Ukrainian battlefield is being studied by militaries around the world. It shows that old doctrines are no longer enough. Large strongpoints are easier to detect. Large mechanized formations are easier for drones to track. Exposed supply routes are vulnerable. Slow command systems can be defeated by the speed of the digital battlefield. In this environment, Ukraine is building smaller, more dispersed, harder to detect positions. Shelters are being reinforced. Movement routes are being concealed. Anti-drone corridors are being built to protect soldiers and supply vehicles. Engineering units are using remote systems to lay mines, clear mines, or build obstacles without sending troops directly into the most dangerous areas. In short, Ukraine is turning defense into a living system, one that observes, adjusts, reinforces, and adapts continuously. While the battlefield in Eastern Europe remains intense, another development is raising major strategic questions: the US military presence in Germany. For decades, Germany has been one of the most important centers of US military power in Europe. Bases such as Ramstein, Stuttgart, Wiesbaden, and others are not only important for Germany, they form the logistical, command, training, and deployment backbone of US and NATO operations across Europe, and even into the Middle East and Africa. Ramstein plays a particularly important role. It is a major hub for moving troops, equipment, military cargo, and communications. Stuttgart hosts key commands responsible for Europe and Africa. Wiesbaden has been mentioned as a coordination center for military support to Ukraine. Other bases support training, rapid response, air defense, and strategic deterrence. For that reason, any US decision to adjust its forces in Germany is not just about troop numbers. It is a political signal. According to the original script, the United States is said to be withdrawing around 5,000 troops from Germany, out of more than 36,000 currently stationed there. In terms of numbers, this is not a withdrawal large enough to collapse America's military structure in Europe. But symbolically, it forces Europe to ask a difficult question: is Washington still as strongly committed to European security as it once was? This is an extremely sensitive question. Since the end of the Second World War, European security has relied heavily on the US military umbrella. NATO is a collective alliance, but key strategic capabilities, from military transport, intelligence, command systems, air defense, long-range missiles, and nuclear deterrence, still depend heavily on the United States. If the United States reduces its role, Europe must ask itself whether it is truly ready. The answer today is, Europe is preparing, but it cannot yet feel completely secure. Many European countries have increased defense spending since the war in Ukraine began. Germany has announced major changes in its security policy. Poland has accelerated weapons purchases and expanded its armed forces. The Nordic countries have strengthened their defenses. NATO has expanded with the accession of Finland and Sweden. But the gap between political determination and real military capability remains large. Buying weapons takes time, building factories takes time, training soldiers takes time, restoring defense industrial capacity takes time, and most importantly, changing the strategic mindset of an entire continent also takes time. That is why every report of a US force adjustment in Europe sounds like a warning bell. Europe cannot depend forever on external security guarantees. If Europe wants to be safe, it must invest more, coordinate better, and prepare more seriously. But the issue is not only military. US-European relations are also shaped by economics, trade, tariffs, and differences in foreign policy. When Washington's priorities can change from one administration to another, European allies are forced to consider the possibility that American commitments may not always be as stable as they would like. That is why countries such as Poland are reacting so strongly. Poland is not only increasing defense spending, it is not only expanding its army, it is not only buying more tanks, artillery, aircraft, and defense systems. Poland is also training civilians in civil defense, survival, first aid, and emergency response. At first, this may sound like a social program. In reality, it reflects a deep shift in national security thinking. In modern war, national defense is no longer only the responsibility of the military. A country becomes truly resilient when the whole society knows how to respond in a crisis. If electricity is cut off, people must know what to do. If communications are disrupted, families must know how to find one another. If evacuation becomes necessary, every person must know what to bring. If someone is injured, basic first aid skills can save a life. If information becomes chaotic, people must know how to distinguish real warnings from false rumors. According to the original script, training courses in Poland have attracted a wide range of participants, families, groups of colleagues, elderly people, teenagers, and ordinary citizens. They learn how to prepare emergency bags, find water, filter water, perform first aid and CPR, leave messages for relatives during evacuation, and protect children in case they become separated during an emergency. These small details reveal something much larger. Poland is preparing for the possibility that society may have to function under crisis conditions. And Poland is not alone. Finland, Sweden, Norway, Estonia, Latvia, and many other countries are also promoting civil defense programs. They all understand that in today's world, war does not always begin with tanks crossing a border. It may begin with cyber attacks, infrastructure sabotage, information warfare, energy crises, unusual migration flows, or gray zone actions that are difficult to attribute clearly. The most important point here is that Europe's psychology has changed. For many years, much of Europe believed that large-scale war on the continent belonged to the past. The war in Ukraine shattered that belief. Now, from governments to citizens, from militaries to schools, from parliaments to local communities, people are talking more about defense, reserves, evacuation, cybersecurity, emergency supplies, and national resilience. In other words, Europe is relearning an old lesson. Peace is not protected by declarations alone. It is protected by preparedness. At the same time, the European Union must also face another deeply sensitive issue: migration and asylum. The European Commission has released a new report on the implementation of the EU Pact on Migration and Asylum. This is considered one of the most significant reforms in the EU's border and asylum management system in many years. Its goal is to better control external borders, create a more unified asylum process ineligible cases more quickly, and protect the fundamental rights of asylum seekers. At first glance, this may seem like an administrative issue. In reality, it is one of the biggest tests of European unity. Frontline countries such as Italy, Greece, and Spain often face heavy pressure from migrants arriving by sea or crossing external EU borders. Meanwhile, some other member states do not want to take on more responsibility. Without a common system, the burden falls disproportionately on a few countries. But if a mandatory sharing mechanism is imposed, many governments face domestic political backlash. This is not an easy problem to solve. If the EU controls migration too loosely, anti-immigration political forces may grow stronger. If it controls migration too harshly, The EU may be accused of abandoning its humanitarian values. If procedures are too slow, the asylum system becomes overloaded. If responsibility is not shared fairly, internal divisions deepen. That is why the Migration Pact is not only about borders. It is about European identity, political stability, governance capacity, and trust among member states. In an unstable world, migration cannot be separated from security. Conflict, climate change, economic crisis, political instability, and geopolitical competition can all create large movements of people. If the EU does not have an effective enough system, migration may continue to become a political fault line within Europe. While Europe is trying to manage war, defense, migration, and relations with the United States all at once, Russia continues to send powerful symbolic messages through its Victory Day parade in Red Square. For Russia, Victory Day is not only a commemoration of the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany in the Second World War. It is also a central pillar of modern Russian political identity. When President Vladimir Putin speaks about courage, unity, and confidence in victory, that message is not only aimed at the Russian public, it is also directed outward, especially toward the West and Ukraine. Moscow wants to show that Russia will not back down. It wants to place the current war inside a broader historical narrative. One in which Russia presents itself as a country standing against pressure from outside powers. This is a way to mobilize national spirit, strengthen political legitimacy, and maintain domestic support for a prolonged war. Ukraine and the West see these messages very differently. To them, such rhetoric suggests that Russia is not ready to compromise. When each side believes it is fighting for survival, national security, honor, and its place in the global order, compromise becomes extremely difficult. This is the most dangerous aspect of the Russia-Ukraine war today. It is no longer simply a territorial dispute. It has become a confrontation over strategic perception. Each side sees the war through a completely different lens. And when both sides no longer share the same understanding of reality, the road to peace becomes much longer. Ladies and gentlemen, if we connect all of today's developments, we can see that the world is entering a deeply concerning period. Ukraine is expanding its drone strike capabilities and bringing the war deeper into Russian territory. Russia continues to maintain military pressure and the hard-line victory narrative. Europe is relearning defense after decades of believing that major war had faded into history. The United States is recalculating its military role in Europe. NATO is adjusting to a new security environment. Poland and other Eastern European countries are preparing their citizens for crisis scenarios. The European Union is trying to manage borders, preserve internal unity, and respond to multiple pressures at the same time. In other words, we are not only witnessing a war, we are witnessing the restructuring of European security. And within that restructuring, three major trends deserve special attention. The first trend is that low-cost technology is changing the balance of power in warfare. Drones, converted pickup trucks, jamming equipment, commercial sensors, and coordination software are making the battlefield more flexible, more dispersed, and harder to predict. Countries with limited resources, if they can innovate quickly, may still be able to exert serious pressure on stronger opponents. The second trend is that Europe is being forced to take greater responsibility for its own security. Disputes in US-European relations, the possibility of US force adjustments, budget pressures, and the risk of prolonged war mean Europe can no longer delay serious defense investment. The question is no longer whether Europe should strengthen its defense, but how much, how fast, and how well coordinated that effort should be. The third trend is that civil society is becoming part of national defense. Poland's civilian training programs show that modern security does not exist only inside military bases. It exists in schools, hospitals, families, power grids, the internet, railways, airports, and the crisis responsibility of every citizen. So, ladies and gentlemen, some may ask, is the world moving toward a new kind of Cold War? The answer is not simple. Today's world is very different from the old Cold War. Economies are more deeply connected. Technology spreads more quickly. Alliances are more complicated. Confrontation is no longer limited to two clearly defined blocks. But one thing is similar: mistrust is returning. Countries are increasing defense spending. Borders are being reinforced. Defense industries are being revived. Citizens are being trained for emergencies. and leaders are speaking more openly about the possibility of war. These are signs that cannot be ignored. For ordinary people, these stories may sound distant, but in reality, their effects can be very close to daily life. An attacked oil refinery can affect energy prices. A paralyzed airport can disrupt transport. A prolonged war can increase inflation. A troop withdrawal can change defense spending. A migration wave can reshape domestic politics. A security crisis in Europe can affect global supply chains. In today's deeply connected world, no major disruption is truly far away from us. That is why the world today does not simply repeat the news. We want to go one step deeper with you. What lies behind each headline? What calculations stand behind each statement? What message is hidden in each attack? And what future security order may emerge from each military decision? Ladies and gentlemen, if today's program could be summarized in one sentence, it would be this: Europe is waking up in a world where peace can no longer be taken for granted. Ukraine is fighting and innovating under pressure. Russia is maintaining military pressure and the hard-line message. The United States is adjusting its role. NATO is being forced to adapt. Poland is preparing society for worse scenarios. The European Union is trying to preserve unity under overlapping pressures. All of this reveals one reality: in this new era, the countries that can defend better, adapt faster, and remain more united will have the advantage in an unstable world. Ladies and gentlemen, history does not always change direction through a dramatic declaration. Sometimes it changes through small signs appearing at the same time: an airport shut down, an oil refinery on fire, a pickup truck turned into a combat vehicle, a military base repositioned, a civilian survival class opened, and an alliance beginning to ask whether it is still safe enough. When these signs appear more and more frequently, the world is reminding us that the age of predictable peace may already be behind us. Thank you for watching The World Today. If you found today's program useful, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, share this video, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. In your view, is Europe truly preparing for defense? Or is the world moving closer to a dangerous new era of confrontation? We wish you good health, peace, and clarity in the face of a rapidly changing world. See you again in the next episode of The World Today.